All right, it is 2:05 my time, Eastern. So let's get started. Thank you so much for being here for this S4 seminar on space sharing. I am really happy to welcome Karen DiLossi, who I have the huge privilege and honor of working with a lot of my time. For various programs, including the Venue program, which we are launching between Bricks and Mortals and Partners for Sacred Places, which is a space sharing website, which is launching in New York City for houses of worship to share their spaces for artists, community groups, and others to easily rent those spaces online. I will just read you a little bit about the glorious and amazing person, the consummate professional and expert that is joining us today, Karen DiLossi from Partners for Sacred Places. Oop, my bot went away, is now back, is currently Director of Strategic Partnerships at Partners for Sacred Places. She is a 12-year space sharing veteran, whoop, whoop. Formerly as Partners first director of the Arts and Sacred Places program, Karen developed a manual of best practices and a series of systems critical to developing long-term sustainable relationships between faith-based and arts organizations. She has contributed to the Center for the Future of Museums as a guest blogger and was an essayist for MICA's MFA in curatorial practice, as well as the Journal for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. She has also served as an expert in space sharing at national arts conferences and local preservation conferences. Karen has worked in professional theater since 2000, both on stage and off. As the director of programs and services for the Theater Alliance of Greater Philadelphia, she produced the annual Barrymore Award ceremony many times and directed them herself twice. Karen taught acting at Westchester University and served as stage manager consultant for Villanova Theater. Karen has a BA in history and drama from Washington College and an MA in theater from Villanova University. As I said, she knows everything that you want to know about space sharing. So we're really lucky to have her with us today. With that, I will hand this over to Karen so she can share with us some lessons for all of us to learn. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Kate. And it's so nice to kind of meet everybody virtually. Thank you so much for putting your information in the chat. I am very familiar, particularly with kind of rules of the road in Chicago and New York City. And I see we have some members from New York State, as well as Kansas City, a lone soldier from Kansas City. So nice to kind of meet all of you. So hopefully, there may be some very Chicago specific examples that I can give at the very end. I kind of have a presentation all set, and Chicago has some very specific rules of the road, particularly with space sharing, which I will happily kind of touch on at the very, very end. Kate, if you wouldn't mind reminding me about that at the end, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Just pardon me for one moment while I get this all set up. Okay, great. All right, can everybody see my slides? Great, all right. So, space sharing, I'm calling the Space Sharing 101. Okay, here we go. I'm Karen DiLossi. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Partners for Sacred Places. So, why share your space? I thought that this would be a good thing to kind of start with. Our spaces may include vast and intimate worship spaces, community rooms, educational facilities, gyms, and maybe even really large lobby areas. And that may be true of your space, whether it was built in 1850, 1950, or even as recent as a few years ago. So have you ever thought to yourself, why? Why was it built for so many people to be gracing its halls? Was all this beauty meant for only you and your fellow members to enjoy? If your house of worship has ever invited others into your worship services, I would venture to say that, yes, these spaces were meant to be shared with you and your community, but also with your loved ones of different faith, your supporters and advocates and other like-minded individuals. It was meant to be inclusive of celebrations like weddings and baptisms and mitzvahs by your members and non-members of your community enjoying the beauty of your space. So your space is a living space. So a little bit of a story time. When my family and I went on a very long overdue vacation last year, I'm sure there was lots of that last year. We were gone for just about 2 weeks. And when we got home, our house smelled a bit stale. The plants had gotten a bit dry despite the occasional watering by a neighbor. And I think we even discovered some moisture had accumulated in the basement due to a faulty dehumidifier. So overall, not too bad. But that was just 2 weeks away in our townhouse, which usually when we're home, we occupy in its entirety. So this is all to say that our buildings are just like living things. Had I not had a neighbor stopping by to water our plants and feed our cat, we would have come home to a series of unfortunate events. So whether our buildings are teeming with people or just sprinkling with people, it makes them overall healthier spaces. All these people inhabiting your spaces can see problems before they develop into larger issues. And as caretakers and stewards of our spaces, our very presence in these buildings helps to maintain them, like taking out the trash, spotting a leaky faucet, or discovering crumbs on the floor. Much like my vacation example, I'm sure many of you had trouble fully maintaining your spaces in light of the quarantine and pandemic. All this extended time with little to no people in your buildings could have allowed really small problems or issues to kind of fester into larger ones. So these are rather bleak and dreary topics, but I also want to make sure you understand the assets of your building's wonderful aesthetics. So no doubt it could include some wonderful acoustics to make all of your church choirs and various cantors very, very happy. And as a theater artist myself, very happy. As only one example, there are many performers who would also love to take advantage of those acoustics. And in my vast 12 years of experience, there are also artists who long to have access to such spaces for their work. Lastly, but not least, your building could serve as a landmark within the fabric of your neighborhood. Passerbys of all kinds, whether they're native to the area or just visiting, may stop to appreciate your building's outer beauty and aesthetics. Your building may also serve as a wayfinding point for folks visiting the area, as a marker of where they are geographically. That is a really underrated value. As someone who plays the role of visitor in a lot of new areas, spotting the church steeple from afar is really, really helpful. So sharing your space means sharing your expenses. Ooh, what am I doing? Oh no, letting it out. Okay, there we go. So this one is a simple no-brainer. So as I'm the daughter of an accountant, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention these very practical and economical piece of the space sharing puzzle. So unless you have zoned heat and air conditioning, you can only imagine how many people may say they have that. You are paying for all of your individual spaces, all those little nooks and crannies, whether you are inhabiting them or not. So if you have staff in your facility, like security or custodial folks, and they're working specific hours of the day, and on top of that, you have spaces within your facility that remain empty or unused, that is time in the space that you're already paying for, but no one is using it. So why not create a special discounted rate just for those already working hours? Are there organizations within your neighborhood in need of space for their programming during those hours? Community members are in need of space for many reasons, both in the long and short term. So why not embrace them within your facility where they may feel safe and to take that administrative burden off of their shoulders to boot? Again, as a theater artist, I know all too well how long it takes to search for rehearsal space. And that can actually be more time consuming than the actual rehearsals taking place. I can tell you that for sure. Even if you're only sharing your spaces for a short period of time, maybe it's once or twice a week, that is time that you would ordinarily get $0 per hour. Excuse me. These short-term needs can have big consequences for your community in the long run, particularly if you host regular civic association meetings, professional development classes, or if you are maybe the polling location for an election. Your space sharing can have a big impact on how many people can attend any of these sessions or how people feel within these spaces. You'll have to pardon me, I'm definitely suffering some cold. It's making me cough quite a bit, so I will try to muscle through. Okay, so what is involved in space sharing? So hopefully I've made the argument a little bit on why you should open your space. So if you're ready, willing, and able to share your space with other entities, other individuals, and organizations, there are many, many questions that follow. How do you figure out what to charge? How do you recruit space sharers? How can we make sure our space is respected? And what comes first and what comes second and what comes third? What order do you do these things? All of it. So I can tell you that there's no specific order for these. And there are some items that you should get to before you go down through the nitty-gritty of logistics. So, okay. What does the community need? All right, I'm going to start off by saying, let's all agree that while Field of Dreams was an inspirational movie that tapped into a lot of emotions, it is not a good way to plan out how to use your space. Let's step away from the if you build it, they will come. Thank you, Hollywood, and no thank you, Hollywood, right? Instead, we encourage you to be mindful of your choices, and there are a lot of ways you can do that. First and foremost, what does the community actually need in terms of space? Well, there is a great way to find out. Invite them into your space. You can host a large celebratory open house event, or especially in these times of COVID, host a smaller, more intimate event. Either one, you can give tours of your space to not just potential users of your space, but to those who are really tapped into what your community needs in terms of space. So sorry. We have found that these listening sessions can be very instrumental in not just understanding the true value of your space, but also about where the energy and enthusiasm lies for certain projects or programs. We recently held one of these listening sessions in Bloomington, Indiana, where the clergy leader was absolutely certain that childcare would be their ultimate contribution to the greater community. However, when we had this very meeting, that same clergy member took the time to stay quiet and listen to both the outsiders who were invited to the table, as well as key members of their congregation. Excuse me. And to their surprise, it was actually the arts that rose to the top. One, as having the most immediate need. Two, had the most energy and enthusiasm behind it. Don't underestimate that. It is a large driver. And three, it was the perfect fit for what the spaces, for the spaces that they had to offer. So you never know what you may find out when you get the right people to the table. Okay, so examples of community space needs. As if I really, as if we really need to list these at this point, but I think it's worth to list them nonetheless. So we have social service organizations for the home and food insecure, mental health, substance abuse and recovery groups, artists and arts organizations. We have studio and performance artists, and they need space both for their creation and for presentation. Civic associations, think about neighborhood meetings, zoning conversations, particularly if it is really close to you. A zoning conversation can really change. If it's about a certain building that maybe is zoned for residential and it wants to be zoned for commercial use or some other use or gathering use, that can really impact the overall community. So hosting those can be really important. And then obviously childcare groups and advocates. So we may all see how one or more of these kinds of users could be in our spaces and how those activities could enliven our space and benefit our community. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about physical space. The physical space. So just like people that you're attracted to and the characteristics that they embody that you're attracted to, it's the same with amenities and qualities of a physical space. As a congregation, you may want to have, and I go to the arts often. It's obviously a go-to, but I can do a lot more than that. But I think they're the really best examples. So as a congregation, you may want to have dance makers in your fellowship hall. But if it's full of columns and has low ceilings, maybe dancers aren't the best fit. You may want to host social services programming, but unless you have private rooms where consultations can take place, that may not be a good fit either. So while we would all love the soulmate that comes with the golden goose, chances are we're getting some nice people or organizations with only modest budgets. The best course of action in most of these space sharing partnerships is to approach it carefully. So we recommend not putting lots of capital dollars into vastly altering your space to suit any one group's needs. Unless, of course, it's already in your original budget and your plan. If it is in your budget and in your plan to make these changes, that's a different story. But don't alter it for one specific group. Ideally, you're looking for space sharing partnerships where neither party has to put out large sums of money to retrofit the space in order to make it work. How can you plug and play? Is there a way to add minor touches, maybe safety outfitting, maybe repairing the floor or applying new paint just to make the space usable versus something like running additional water lines or adding in additional electrical wiring? Make sure that the physical space has the minimal amenities available to make your space sharing partners' work function so that they can develop their work in a safe environment. Know what amenities you already have in your physical space, because there may be a group that needs exactly that without changing a thing. And I know I see there's questions. I'm going to get to everybody at the end. Please type them in though, because I want to answer everybody's questions. Capacity and fiscal responsibility. So capacity in this case means not just literal butts and seats, but it's also about what is your capacity in terms of human capacity to be able to handle the renters and the space sharers that are coming into and out of your facilities. You need to ask yourself some essential questions. Who's going to interact with your renters? Who's going to correct problems within the facilities that occur when the renters are using it? How will you address security issues when renters are present? Will you provide cleaning services before and after your rentals? Alternatively, because that's, those are all things that reflect on your capacity to be able to do all these things. Alternatively, if you are lucky enough to have a long-term space sharer, could that anchor tenant assist in shorter term rentals? So if you have someone that's there for a longer period of time, can they actually assist you with shorter term ones? Is that going to be a part of your rental agreement with that tenant? Could that anchor tenant possibly recruit or secure new renters and space sharers in exchange for a booking fee? Basically, is it possible to expand your human capacity with your future space sharers of all kinds? It's certainly something to consider if you find someone that you feel you can trust and will appropriately reflect your values. That is very important to know. And I'm trying to think if I have this kind of mapped out later, but because you're a house of worship, your renters will always be intrinsically linked to you, not like a commercial space. A renter could rent a commercial space and it doesn't really matter if it's, ABC Rentals are us, it doesn't really matter. But if it's, St. Paul's Church or Trinity Church, and it's a group or an organization, it's always going to be linked to that. I think I do talk about that a little bit later, but I thought I'd touch on it now. Fiscally, I want you to encourage to do the math. Figure out how much any one, just start with one of your spaces. Figure out how much any one of your spaces costs you if you were going to rent it out for any period of time. If it makes it easier, think about renting it to somebody, who's going to get an exclusive contract. They're going to get a 24/7 contract. So think about what that monthly rent would be for this space. If that is a way to you could do it that way and then drill down. I want you to make an active choice as to whether or not you are subsidizing the space sharer, or if the space sharer is actively supporting your structural envelope and maintenance of the building. Find out what local commercial rates are nearby. How does your space compare with those commercial spaces in terms of amenities, in terms of access, in terms of availability? Will you make your space more attractive in comparison with a more attractive rate? Will you try to match the amenities and then tout your space's aesthetic beauty as a way to attract new renters? All these questions are specific to you, your members, and your available spaces, and make all of the correct answers for you and your house of worship. Please know there are no right or wrong answers, just the answers that are right for you. So, logistics. Kate was the one that made me do all this. So you only have her to blame. So logistics. Once you have figured out how your space is best used, how you can manage it, right? So all of that, how it's best used, how you can manage it, and the rates that maybe make the most sense to you. Now it's time to address a list of logistics or kind of to-do items. So this list I'm about to go through is by no means exhaustive. It is really not. That would be a much longer PowerPoint, much longer everything. But this is touch points that I think should be on everyone's lists. All right. First, there is no one size fits all model. In this space sharing conversation, it is important to know that there is no one size fits all. Depending on the size and space needs of your space sharing partner and the size and capacity of your house of worship, the shared space agreement may be wildly different. And I'm here to tell you that there is no one size fits all. There's no formula that's right that you can do for everybody. Whether it's by length of time, short-term versus long-term, or by pay scale, bartering versus rent money. And it could be any combination of this. You need to figure out for yourselves which you will provide. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's a negotiation between you and your space partner. For some houses of worship, you may decide that you're okay with any one of these types of arrangements. Whereas for others, you may find that really only one or two are even possible. And it's far better for you to go into a relationship knowing full well what you're able to take on in terms of human capacity and fiscal responsibility. I'm just going to quickly touch on all of these on this list. So by length of time, we have short-term one-time rentals. We all know what those are. Folks come in, they pay a certain amount of money. Maybe they're there for a day, a weekend, a week. They come, they have their event, they leave. And it's an exchange of money. That's it. Short-term recurring. This is someone that you might have, a little bit more of a relationship with, because maybe they need 3 weeks in this month and 3 weeks in this month and 3 weeks in this month, and they're a regular renter and they come every year. So you have that, right? Or then there's the long-term, sustainable, mutually beneficial ones. And those are those potential anchor tenants that I was talking about. These folks usually have more money. You may have a longer term relationship with them. Maybe they can sign a contract for more than a year. Maybe they will take on spaces on a 24/7 basis if you have that available. And then there's by pay scale. And again, you can combine any one of these, right? So there's a straight up bartering skill for space. Maybe there is someone out there who needs space for a certain class that they want to teach, or some other kind of event. And maybe they're a really good carpenter, and maybe there's some carpentry that needs to happen in the space. And maybe they're like, well, you know what, I can fix those shelves, or I can fix your door jambs if you kind of loan me some space. Don't pay me, let me have some space, right? So that's what that is. Negotiating rates based on ability to pay and wear and tear on the space. So there may be a group that you really feel you need to support, and they don't have the kind of money that you wish that they had. But on the other hand, the wear and tear on the space isn't going to be so bad. Meaning, like, maybe they're going to have a class that's more of a lecture class. Maybe it's like 10 students. Maybe they meet once a week. And you were hoping to get X dollars, but they kind of don't have that, but you really want to support what it is they're doing, what it is they're teaching. So you can do that, because, like, let's say a class of 10 students, maybe taking something like a lecture class or a writing class or something like that is way different than if there's a performance, and they may need the space for a few weeks at a go, and they may need to have let's say 100, 200 people coming in and out of your space, using the restroom facilities. You may need to have the heat or air conditioning on at a more advanced rate, etc. So you could see how those two activities would be very different. So you may negotiate the rates based on that. And then there's just straight up, this is the space, this is how much it costs. And for those of you that may have had to rent to the film industry before, you may have used more of that model as a way to kind of, make money. And certainly if there are commercial renters, they're much more used to, like, oh, this is what the space costs. Great, here you go. So again, there's no one size fits all. These are just some models. Okay. To-do items. Once you've kind of figure out what space sharing model you can actually, what models you could do, photographs and your website and social media. Professional photographs are absolutely 100% worth the money. And to be honest, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg to get them done. So while I can personally take credit for many of the photos you see in the slideshow today, they're really going to pale in comparison to what a professional photographer can do. In addition, you can clean your spaces, you can stage them for optimal conditions for your photographer. You can think about what is the golden hour for all of your spaces. When do they really look the best? When is the sun coming through the window just right? And have the photographer take those pictures then. So really figure out how your facility can shine, and shine it up, buff it up, and bring a photographer in to take those photos. I would say prep your website for space sharing. Think about, what is the text you want to say on the page? How are you going to advertise the spaces on your own website? I can't tell you how many congregational websites I've been to, and there's nothing about renting the space. I mean, I might be able to find something about weddings, and that I might, and I say I might. So it's not always obvious. So definitely think about your website. It is your page to the world. So think about what the text is on the page, how you would like to advertise the spaces on your own website. And if you have some core groups you think you would like to support, that's a good way to showcase it. I have one here. There's so many people in Chicago, but Unity Lutheran actually has a page. That's what that screenshot is there. And they have a tab all about space sharing. So I think that's, good to kind of keep in mind. So I would also offer that going lighter on the text is probably best. If you go too heavy on the text, people kind of glaze through it. You want to have more bullet points. Keep it brief, straight to the point. Don't feel obligated to post your rental rate, but give people a chance to reach out for more information. You can say things that lead people to believe that there are ways to negotiate the rental rate, that you do have rates. Perhaps telling folks online that you welcome artists, you welcome members of the social service community, or you welcome those suffering from substance abuse. Invite them in just as much as you may search for that wedding or that sweet 16 birthday party venue, just as a way of letting the broader public know who you're actively seeking. And all those folks, the sweet 16 folks, the wedding folks, the substance abuse folks, the artist folks, you can invite all or none or some. Again, it's entirely up to you. There's no right or wrong answer. All right, more to-do items. Operations calendars, payment processing. So if you're currently using a desk blotter that's on the church administrator's desk as your operational calendar, space sharing may not be right for you at this moment. I doubt a lot of you are, but I actually used to work at a theater company that had just that. It kind of makes me cringe now. So there are a great many online calendars out there that also allow you to embed them onto your website. So if you have multiple rooms, you can assign each one a color. You can block off dates and times that you're using it. And that allows your potential renters to see when the space is available and when they may need it. So it's just such a great tool, and one that I'm sure everybody's already familiar with. But if not, just try experimenting, maybe with Google Calendar to start. It's free and it's accessible anywhere with internet. And I believe that Apple Calendar and Microsoft Office also have great calendar programs. Okay, so all this means nothing unless you have a way to process the payments. So there are a lot of ways for you to do that online that should be painless. I know it can be a lot. I've actually just done this personally for my son's home and school association. So believe me, I know what it is to kind of go through, but I think it's definitely worth it in the end. I have some that are listed here that could be familiar to you, and all of them have different processing fees or ways that they work. On many of them, on a few of them, you can actually create your own QR code for payment, which we have definitely done. So people have come up with their phones, taken a picture of it, and then they're able to make a donation or make a purchase right there in person. I believe PayPal has that, Venmo has that, Cash App maybe. So those are just some options for that. Make sure you have more than one option for people. Accessibility for ease of payment is really, really key. The easier you make it for them to pay, the easier it will be for you to collect your money. So, and I also, Zelle, if you're not familiar with Zelle, that is like a direct bank to bank conversation. And I don't think there's any fees, I don't think, associated with that. So there's a lot of ways you could do that. Okay. So last but definitely not least is insurance and sweating the small stuff. So I have here insurance a must have. I'm not even sure what else I was going to type. You just have to have it. It is this necessary evil almost, because it's just, it can feel really onerous. Make sure that you ask your insurance company provider what events are already covered. So you're already paying for insurance, I'm sure. So some things may already be covered. Like I discovered, like AA groups are already covered under some church insurances. So, or things like weddings may already be covered. But then there may be other folks that maybe need separate insurance, like an art show or a civic association meeting, as examples. And obviously, if you have a longer term tenant, they're going to want insurance for themselves as their own liability. So definitely contact your insurance provider, see what it is that what they already cover and what those coverage limits are. So you could share that with folks, but also find out what it is that they will not cover. I would also say that you can ask them what limits they would set for space sharers. They may also give you really outlandish numbers for that. Just kind of warning you. So it may or may not work out depending on that, and you can make that determination. It's really hard. Insurance providers are really tough. So in terms about sweating the small stuff, ask about everything, and include everything that you can. So if it's with a long-term tenant, you may want to put all of these items and more into the actual agreement. Or you may take all these separate items and generate at least a general building policy document if you don't already have one. And this is just a list of things. Trash removal, signage, snow removal, all that. There are really no stupid questions, just the questions that have gone unasked. So don't kick yourself for not asking, ask the questions. Figure out what you want to do as a policy for trash, site cleanliness, snow removal, Wi-Fi access. Talk about it. Create a policy. Keys to the building or keyless entry. Who has the keys? Who has the codes? Put it in your space sharing documents, like, generate these documents in advance of all this stuff, if you can. Because those documents are going to be the rules of the road for your space sharing relationships moving forward. So if something, like if both parties sign on to these building policies, you'll always have it to go back to when problems arise. I can't tell you how many times I've been brought into a situation where they had a contract, a rather lengthy one, and then there was a problem down the road, and I was brought in to help facilitate a solution. And the first thing I said was, where's the contract? Or where's the building use policy that people signed on? It is your absolute guidebook and rule book for moving forward. It's not going to cover everything. There will be things that'll come up that are not going to be covered in that, but at least both parties can know what the rules are from the outset. Okay. So, oh my gosh, I keep doing this. Whew. All right. Know thyself. Throwing a little Latin out there at you. So in my 12 years of doing space sharing work, we have 6 items. I'm actually working on a 7th. I'm working on developing material for a 7th. But for right now, we have 6 things that you should know about yourself, your congregation, and the person or organization that you're partnering with. And in our full training, in partners full training, we go in depth into all of these things, along with stories about what worked and what didn't work. And sometimes what didn't work is almost more important than what did work, because there's so many lessons to be learned from what did not work. So mission and vision alignment. This goes all the way back to what I spoke about before, about you're going to be linked whether you want to or not. If you're hosting an organization as a house of worship, it has been my experience that as a house of worship, whomever you host, it is tantamount that you are saying you support or advocate or endorse this group. So it's very important to know what their mission and vision is, whether it is a nonprofit or a for-profit, because you can also help support business entrepreneurs and people trying to put good things out into the world, even if it is in a for-profit manner. There's nothing to say that nonprofit or for-profit or one is better or worse. They're just different. So mission and vision alignment. What is the vision and value set of the people you are hosting? And how do you see yourself in that and supportive of it? And are they supportive of yours as well? Personal compatibility. Let's not overlook or oversee this at all. It matters. it matters very much, particularly if it is a long-term arrangement. Something that is short-term, if there's like a bit of a, butting heads there, you can kind of get over that because like, well, it's going to be done in a week or it's going to be done in a month. But something that's going to be long-term, you really want to make sure that, that there is some personal compatibility there, at least between the people that are doing the talking to one another. And to make sure that there is compatibility there, and to always make sure the communication goes through that. Content. What are people doing? What are they doing in the space? To borrow a phrase from our Jewish friends, what's kosher and what's not kosher in the space. And there may be different levels of sacred as well. What may be kosher or not kosher in your sanctuary may be very different from what's kosher or not kosher in your fellowship hall or your education wings. Different levels of sacredness there. There's kinds of shades of gray there. So just to kind of keep that in mind. And the people sharing your space should be honest and transparent on what it is they're actually doing. What is your decision-making process? Knowing what it is that you actually, what is your actual process? If I had known, one of my first contracts was with a Baptist church, and I did not know that they voted, that the actual congregants voted, up until we were towards the 11th hour. And I nearly had a heart attack thinking that this was never going to work. So please, please, please share your decision-making process up front with your potential space sharing partner, or post it somehow on your space sharing policy, saying like it has to go through the vestry, or it has to go through session, or it has to go through the congregation, or it has to go through our executive director. There's so many. I listed a bunch. I didn't even cover all of it. So what is your decision-making process? And then obviously, like finances, be honest with yourself, know what it is that you can charge or shouldn't charge, or know what it is that you have the capacity to do financially. And physical space, just what can be in there, what is the most likely candidate, and what will add the most vibrancy to the space. So space sharing can be really at the core of your economic, of your community development, and your stakeholder plans. Big time on your stakeholders. If you're looking for outsider stakeholders beyond your membership, look to your space sharing partners, because those are the people that are coming in that are not coming in for worship services. And it can be scary. And I don't want to undercut like the many security concerns that can come up as a result of sharing your space. There's a lot of scary news, even just in recent days. We're not safe in our schools or our grocery stores. So I don't want to undercut that. But I think those concerns need to be embedded in your space sharing programming and your contracts. And I further think that if you find space sharing partners that share your values and your vision of the world, if you really think about like what it is that you want out there in humanity, that those concerns will be taken seriously, and sharing space may possibly make your space more lively, more meaningful, and more capable of fulfilling your values. So, and then I have the Q&A slide. So I will stop my share. I'm not sure exactly what happened all there, but I had a lot of flubs in the technology. I apologize for that. I saw there was a bunch of questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I've been monitoring that, and I'll just say thank you so much. That was, I work with you a lot, and I learned things. I was taking notes, and it looks like folks were taking notes as you were talking to. So I think that was really helpful for everyone. Thank you for being here, even though you have a little cough going on. I really appreciate it. I guess the first question is, I know there's recording happening now, but are you okay with sharing the slides also? That was one of the questions that came up in the chat.
Sure.
Okay, great. Because like Karen said, I asked specifically for a lot of these really detailed ways to start space sharing. So I know it'd be helpful to get your hands on these slides as we go through them. And, being part of of the S4 program, the program is designed so that you have a project that you're engaged in. And, all the steps that Karen described don't happen overnight. That's why space sharing can be one of the programs the project that you engage in, because it does take time to do. So if you choose for space sharing to be the project that you engage in or component of that, we're here to support you during that transition to make all of those things that Karen mentioned come to fruition. So it definitely doesn't have to happen, in the next 2 weeks or in the next 6 months. Although, we can make it happen, pretty quickly, or, not in 2 years. So I guess related to that, Karen, since you do this work all the time, how difficult is it for folks to go through these steps? And like, what is the timeline that you've seen? I know it must vary between congregations, but what do you think, if folks decided today, I'm going to start doing everything that was laid out?
Right. I think if because I completely understand that the folks that will be doing potentially the bulk of this work may be volunteers at the church. So with that in mind, definitely the energy and enthusiasm part is really important. So to make sure you have people that are really energetic and enthusiastic about that work. I think all told, I would think from the moment you're like, yes, we made this decision, we want to share our space, to we have a website or a web page on our website up and running and we're ready to take on things, I'm going to say give yourself like 6 months, 6 to 9 months to be able to do that and do it right. And that may differ if you have, I've been to a lot of congregation spaces. If there's a lot of like stuff in some of these rooms, I know like churches end up being a repository for stuff and people think they're being super helpful because the church can use it. It's okay to get rid of it. It's really okay to get rid of it. In theater, we have a phrase called the sacred cow. We're not supposed to have idols anyway, so get rid of it. It's okay. So, don't have the sacred cow. And have the spaces be what you want them to be and have them be a reflection of your congregation and the pride that you have in your spaces is what I would say. So that may take some time if there's some clearing of the spaces that need to happen. And sometimes it can be hard for other people to visualize if there's a lot of stuff in the space. Think about realtors, and realty, like when they're selling spaces and they basically kind of vanilla box them. I'm not saying you have to vanilla box stuff, but just to clear out spaces and clean them up, I think is key. And going through all those policy things, which depending on your church's polity, it can take a while for you to decide what your building policies, rules, and regulations are. So rather than taking up that time while you're actively talking to a space sharer, do that beforehand so you actually have it on hand.
Yeah, and so I guess another question, and you touched on this a little bit in the mission and vision alignment. I'm doing these one-on-one calls with all of the congregations in the program, and this question came up related to that, which is the congregation is interested in doing space sharing, and they were asking, what if someone wants to rent our space that doesn't share our values? We have to rent to them, and how do we navigate that? Do we have to tell them that we don't want to rent to them because they don't share our values, or how do we have that conversation?
No, that's a great question. And I think the answer is no, you don't have to. You don't have to rent to anybody you don't want to. Now, if you're in a financial position where you desperately need the funds, you may have some other questions you should be asking yourself. So I would say as a congregation, you should be hosting folks that are more reflective of your own core values. Because again, I'm fairly confident about that, about it being linked to your congregation. And if it's somebody out there that's not, you know, not jibing with the vibes that you have, and they have a completely different set, or there's a big difference of opinion, then maybe that's not something you want to put out there, even though they may be paying you well for it. And other things that may not matter. Like I mentioned film shoots, like as long as, you know, I mean, maybe you're not even like a location for the film shoot, but maybe you're like their catering hall. You know, I mean, there's nothing really there. I wouldn't say that you necessarily would have to worry about the, you know, what the movie's content is if you're just a catering hall for them, versus like if they are actually filming in your sanctuary, like what is the content of what they're filming, or if it's a business that, if it's an aspiring business that maybe has practices that you don't agree with. You know,
I totally agree about being tied to those organizations, that it will, if there's a news story, that will definitely come up.
Yep.
So do you have to tell them explicitly why you're not renting to them, or can you just say we're booked? Or what would you
remember? I think you could say you're not available. I mean, I'm kind of taking that from like, I put feelers out there all the time to commercial sites, and they just say they're not available, and I'm like, okay. And I don't think twice about it, really. So, and the other thing is, I'm going to take a page from my mother's book, Mama Reads DiLossi, and just say like, listen, if you don't want them, say no. You know, and she's not wrong in that. She's really not. So it's okay to say no to those things. It can be a choice. It's your space. So, and I did want to touch really quickly on the whole Illinois, particularly Chicago, Cook County. I know that they like to take their pound of flesh, in terms of space sharing, in terms of like, give me that sweet, sweet church money, from all those huge rentals you have. What I will say to the folks of Chicago that are in Cook County in particular is that, what we did, we created space sharing agreements. Okay, they were not like rental agreements or license or leases. They were space sharing agreements. We also would put in as a preamble before anything else in the contract, and it would say something like where it was a whereas therefore statement. Whereas we are a church that believes in XYZ values, and here's this Bible quote and this Bible quote and this Bible quote that support that. Therefore, we are happy to host ABC organization for their, you know, events or their meetings or their classes, because that is reflective of ABC values and Bible quote, Bible quote, Bible quote. It makes it really, if you actually align your missions, that's why that mission and vision alignment is so important. If you actually align your missions, then what you're saying to the folks at Cook County is that, yes, they were making a donation. That donation was paying for, like, you know, electricity and water usage and things like that. But they're also reflective of the value set that we want to put out into the world. And a really great example that a lawyer in Chicago gave to me once was like, there's a big difference between that and if you're renting your parking spaces for people. The parking spaces that you're renting will be taxed because there's no value set in that. You're just renting spaces. But if you want to host an arts group, or if you want to host like a feeding ministry, or an outside feeding ministry, right? It doesn't always have to be yours. It could be someone else's, but they're helping to pay, you know, because they're using the ovens or they're using the water. I mean, they're actually using stuff in the space. It doesn't cost $0 to open up the door. It costs money. So I think that presents a really, you know, rock solid argument in terms of what it is that they're doing. So I wanted to kind of put that out there to all of my Chicago folks in the room right now. I know they're
no, I was gonna, there were a couple questions in the chat about insurance and space sharing also. And also I had sent an email related to our Venuli project looking for insurance brokers, and I got a lot of similar responses coming back to me on the same topic from this group, about how folks were counting space sharing rent or donations. So, and those are reflected in the chat. Which is, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an expert in Cook County, but many people around the country were saying that they were being advised that if they counted it as a donation rather than rental, they didn't have to report it as income. Now, we have spoken to our pro bono counsel, and I don't think that's the case. But that doesn't put your 501c3 at risk. That was the other. Yeah, there are two questions about this from India and Caleb. As long as they're a nonprofit, it doesn't put your 501c3 at risk. It's more difficult. There's more difficult and specific regulations if you're renting to a for-profit. And I made a note here to mention that I sent this in my email on Monday, that we do have pro bono legal counsel, technical assistance for all the members of S4. And I would really recommend, if you're thinking of starting a space sharing program, reaching out to them on that question, and also to help set up some of the templates that Karen mentioned, like these space use agreements in particular. They can help you think about some of those questions and look at your jurisdictions in particular, because like I know for Cook County, they have a lot of really specific regulations, but just to make sure everything is clear and everyone's, different locations.
Yeah, in my experience, again, I'm putting that filter on it. The Fed doesn't really care. It is your local state, city, county. When you drill down into those local laws, that's where it matters. I know in the state of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, where I live, it doesn't matter. So we don't have to have that kind of language in any of the agreements. So definitely it's a really drilling down into like what is the local law of the land. But it's always good to have that mission and vision alignment. I think whether it's like for profit, nonprofit, whatever it is, it's always good to have that mission and vision alignment piece in there.
Yeah, so were there any other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. So were there any other questions free to everyone?
What insurance does the church need to have? So Caleb, that is going to differ. I have seen over my 12 years that number change with every single contract, which is why I think it's good to know what you're already paying for. You may already be paying for, you're just looking for general liability insurance for the space and for the like per person occurrence, like if someone's body is hurt, like there's the hurting of the stuff in the space and the hurting of the person. So see what you're already paying for already and ask your insurance broker what that is. And then they'll give you recommendations. And it could be that if there is already, I'm trying to think of other potential like space sharers in whatever town that you might be in, aside from churches, a library, some civic buildings, see what it is that they're requiring their space sharers to have, and maybe just try to match that.
Yeah, and also I was gonna say on the insurance, you should also be getting your renters should be getting insurance that covers themselves also.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yes. Yeah. Covering, everybody needs to name everybody else as an additionally insured. It's insurance. It's like such a morass. It's crazy and a mire. It's a morass and a mire.
Can you say that again? I need to get a recording of that because I'm actually dealing with somebody who does not want to give us a COI naming the church as the owner, babe. And
As the owner?
try, well, I'm so sorry. I apologize for butting in, but I just got off the phone from dealing with that issue. So we actually have a school in our building.
Mhm.
And we've been trying to get a COI, a certificate of insurance from them for over a year and a half that has our name on it. And it seems like they just don't believe it's standard practice anymore because it's something they never had to do before. And so we're actually fighting for that. We're in a fight just to get a piece of paper.
Wow, I would,
There's somewhere where that's written where you can send that to me or email it to us, all of us.
I mean, I have created a lot of contracts that have that insurance requirement in it. And in that space sharing agreement, it says like, so-and-so must name so-and-so as an additional insured. And so-and-so will name so-and-so. It's like, it's both on both sides. So it's not like, you would have to name them as well as them naming you. I've never heard of anybody giving an issue with that. But Althea, is that how you pronounce your name?
I'll feel you.
Althea, how, like, maybe think about going to some other space sharing folks, just like you would ask them for like what it is that they want to cover and see what they're doing. Again, think like, again, like civic buildings or libraries or theaters, like nonprofit theaters. They'll rent their spaces out to other folks and see what it is they're requiring and how their language is, because that would be a good crossover, I think.
I'll try.
But certainly you can reach out via Kate, or, I can send you the language, but I don't know if sending that language is gonna, just because it's in other contracts, every contract's gonna be different. But I'm happy to send you language.
Yeah, you can send me language. I'll still take it.
Have you spoken with either your insurer or your denomination about it?
Yes. Yes on both. Yes.
And have they given any helpful advice?
My insurance company is in contact with the insurance company of the school. They've had phone conversations, they have had emails, and the gentleman refuses to do it. Now he's kicked the matter back to the school itself or to the board that oversees the school. The board chairperson is hedging. So we now have to go to have a meeting with her, as it has been explained to her that this is now standard practice, and what was done, over a decade ago, things have now changed. So, and yes, the denomination is aware of the issue, as I've spoke to the chairperson of the BOT and the chairperson for insurance under the BOT. So unbelievable for me that it's even a fight.
Yeah, I've never heard of anybody saying I won't do that. It has been a standard practice for my work, I will say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I guess the difficulty is now you have the agreement already in place, so that's what makes it difficult. They're already in the space.
Yes, they were in the space before I came, and the contract or the agreement that was written between the two entities is in favor of the school and not the church. So it says that yes, they have to issue us a COI, but it doesn't say within the contract that we have to be listed in the COI. So now, as we're trying to update, make changes, be in line with what is going on now, we are in a fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's any language that says, and there's any legal language that you can find on that says that according to New York State or New York City law, I mean, not that you would find, but that your denomination or that your insurer can provide, that says this is required for your space, your insurer might be able to provide it for you, or an attorney from the denomination, then you can go back to them with that. I think that's going to be probably the easiest way to get them to make that change.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry about that. That's just difficult, and you may have just to strong arm it a bit. Any recommendations on marketing? Once you have everything kind of done, all of your pretty pictures, your website ready to go, make sure it's something easy to get to too. I didn't even mention that. Like one of the things I did, I'm doing work in New York City right now. And we have a page for New Yorkers to go to kind of participate, but I didn't want some long URL, and I didn't want them to have to go to our main site and then search around for it. So I said, just go to sacredplaces.org/NYC. Super easy, super duper easy. So if it's like, yourchurchname.org/sharing space, great. Like something like super easy. And you can do that on the back end. So in terms of marketing, I think social media is a really cheap way to do it. I mean, with Facebook, you could create a Facebook page just for your spaces, not necessarily your church, but your spaces. And that could create a whole different following. And then you could do ads through that, and you can set maximums for that, and it would go to people looking for space. I know if there are any, I would say, if there are any resources, like cultural resources, like umbrella organizations, to list your space with them if they have that ability, or to, again, like if you're in a smaller town, you can also literally host an open house, and have people come through. It may be the case that people have wanted to come through your doors for a long time, and just never had didn't even know what door to knock on. So rolling out the red carpet for them and helping them kind of enjoy it. Talk to people at the government level too, because they're going to be interested in your space being enlivened, because that ultimately helps their footprint of the city or state or county or whatever being a better place for everybody to live. Certainly you could start within your own congregation, and let them know, hey, we're renting space. And maybe if you do host some small, like, sweet 16 birthday parties, or, like, I'm sorry, I have my son's bar mitzvah on my mind. So like, I'm desperately seeking a space for the bar mitzvah party, right? So it's like, if you can host some of those things, now you have all these other people, maybe you give those first people a special rate, so that you can put up a poster saying interested in renting this space, and those are kind of small things. But certainly you could just like advertise in the local paper too. It doesn't have to be like a lot of money, but I know that if I'm looking for a local resource, we do actually have like a little local paper that gets thrown on my stoop once a week. So if there's a newsletter, things like that, things that people go to, there's not a lot of things like Venuely, like what Kate and I are developing in New York. There used to be something called Space Finder that was in a lot of towns, and I used to tell people to advertise on that, but that's not around anymore. But you might be able to advertise on, in playbills too, or each other's bulletins, and you never know is the kind of the answer. And I would say, like, look at those lower level things that you think aren't going to be a big draw, but people do look at them. Or look at if you have any diners around town, is there any like spaces for those like paper placemats, or any places like that around that have like little spaces for ads? Like, you just never know. And again, if you keep the URL simple, or you develop a QR code for people to just zap, or maybe there's a festival coming up and your church is going to have a booth at the festival anyway, start advertising about it there, create a brochure about it. Again, like, own it a bit. Hopefully that's kind of helpful.
Yeah, I think also just having basic material that you can bring places, like, you know, if you're going somewhere, have it there anyway, start dropping it off places. I know there's like a coffee shop in my town that have like a table of everyone's local businesses. So, you know, start putting that places you see that. Start bringing it with you every time you're representing your congregation somewhere. So it just gets more and more places, and it starts being, you know, something that you do and integrate into your practices. Start just having it at your congregation in the fronts, so that people start picking it up and bringing it around and know that it's available. Maybe, you know, their Girl Scout meeting needs a new place to meet, you know, for their kids, or, you know, their office needs somewhere to have their party, and they start thinking about it for that, and it gets more in the mindset of that.
Yeah. Dollars to donuts, your best marketing is going to be word of mouth and Google. So making sure, really having that website, you know, kind of up to snuff in terms of, if you don't have anything about rent our space or share our space or some kind of language like that on your website, no one's ever going to know. So if I'm Googling spaces to share or space rentals or whatever in Chicago, your space is never going to come up, basically.
And we'd also talked about, even though there's not somewhere like Benulli that's in Chicago, I had spoken with Caleb about creating, you know, a network for the folks that are in, you know, the Chicago area. And, you know, this can be done if you have a network of congregations that you're in touch with wherever you are, for folks that are doing space sharing, so that if someone comes to you, and it's not a good fit, but you know there are 5 other congregations that also do space sharing, then you can share those leads around with people, and maybe it's a better fit for one of them. And then you can develop leads in that way too. So there's maybe not somewhere that, you know, is an online website for it, but you have, you know, your colleagues that you're already doing this networking with.
Someone did ask, India asked, any other examples of space sharing I find particularly successful or innovative?
And I'll remind you to say the Chicago examples too,
Right.
if that fits in that category.
Trying to think. Well, I mean, that Unity Lutheran has a whole web page dedicated to space sharing, and they've basically, I think, I want to say, I've been doing this for too long, but I want to say they came to one of our Arts and Sacred Places training and were so inspired, they started doing it, and then found out that so many people were renting their space that they actually were able to hire someone to kind of take care of all the rentals and create a page. So it's been one of my go-tos. The other picture I had, the other website with the cool pictures, that one was Christ Church Neighborhood House. It's in Philadelphia. And they created an entire separate 501c3 just for their spaces for rents. And I think it may be Neighborhood House. If you Google Christ Church Neighborhood House, Philadelphia, it'll pop up. And it has a whole separate website. It talks about like who it is that they like to rent to. They raise money separately. So that's certainly something to also consider. I mean, a separate 501c3 means that it kind of has a separate staff, but the staff also gets funded from the church. The church also gets use of the space. I think they get like first dibs, and then everything else gets rented out. But it is definitely something to consider in terms of fundraising. Because I think it's like Neighborhood House Historic Trust or Preservation Trust or something like that. So so they're keeping up with the building, basically using that separate 501c3. But then there's also a former Catholic school building that started off with a couple of artists renting their classrooms. And now it's just become a hub because of word of mouth. Because I helped put 2 artistic organizations in there. And I was actually just there a couple days ago, leading some folks on a tour because they wanted to see an example. And the priest has just kind of taken it on his own. And he's got all kinds of people in there that I had nothing to do with. So he has made it into this artistic hub because now when artists are looking for space, there's always a classroom or two that don't have anything in them. And remember, it's not just about like in terms of, it's not just about these kind of presentational spaces. So when you think about presentation, it could be arts, it could also be retail. It's not just about that. It's just about like kind of administrative space. If there's a organization, any kind of nonprofit that might want to have interns, they can't have the interns come to their home. So they might just need a space like that to work from. This priest just kind of latched onto the arts, and that's just what they're doing. So he's got all kinds of artists in there. He's even got like just a percussionist renting a classroom right now. So, you know, so I think that the particularly successful and innovative ones are the ones where the congregation really kind of takes it on their own, and makes it their own, and enjoys it, loves kind of having these people in their space doing different things that are not necessarily associated with their form of worship, adjacent and supportive of, the ultimate humanitarian goals of your religion, but not necessarily there for worship services. New York City tax exemption or water exemption, how to avoid endangering them. I'm going to say that would be a question better answered by the attorneys than me.
We can put this over in bricks and mortals, and we're going to be issuing we've really been focused more on how to get your tax exemption rather than how to not lose it. There are certain things that mostly you have to keep up with the paperwork, to be honest, and filing on an annual basis. And I know I think you're in the presbytery, you're at Rendell, right? So I know I actually just went to their seminar on how to get your water exemption. So I know they have really good resources on that. And I would talk to them if you have any questions. But maybe we'll issue a resource too on how to keep your exemption, not just get an exemption. But essentially it's filing, a big part of it is filing your paperwork every year. And for the DEP, it's the same thing.
Yes, Lisa, go ahead.
Well, part of that question is really, does renting out to possibly some for-profit and not-for-profits endanger your tax status in a place like New York City, where they have gotten crazy about the tax exemptions and the water exemptions, and they're always sort of like hounding you and trying to get a piece of the money? That's the New York's like Chicago, I guess.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Again, I really think there is a lot to that mission and vision alignment piece, and really connecting your congregation to this other entity and why it is that you're going in on this together. I mean, New York property is not cheap to maintain, particularly like these very large envelopes. And the city is not unaware of the particular pressure that churches in Harlem specifically are under. I would also say, because I know that the Manhattan Borough President's Office has been in that as well. So that is a resource for you to tap into, because I know it's something that they want to make sure that the fabric of places like Harlem actually maintains its status as, Harlem, and not getting transferred over to something else or become something else because developers really want the land. So I think it's really important to plant your flag in terms of the piece of Harlem that you represent, and that specialty, and that you're hosting these folks because they represent this value set or this vision of that you have. I've been working with Dr. McQueen at St. James Presbyterian in Harlem as well, working with him about how to gauge all of that. So he's already navigating that for sure. But definitely tuck the Manhattan President's Office, talk to Bricks and Mortals. And there is resources there. And I would say to make sure that make a hullabaloo out of it. We did that here in Philly when the city decided they were going to tax nonprofit entities, and that included arts venues. So all of the artists and all of the pastors came to city council and basically were like, over our dead body, and like, this is what we're doing for the community, and city council backed down. We also even had the sports stadiums standing up for us as a collective, which was kind of amazing. They were like, why are you taxing them? You should be taxing us more, as a separate entity. So there really are a lot of resources and support there. And sorry, I've got a little bit of a soapbox there, but it really gets my goat. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's it's never a problem to rent to a nonprofit. You can rent to for-profits also without endangering your 501c3. It's just a little bit more complicated. And again, I would reach out to the pro bono attorney through, you have to be connected through your coach, and then I'll connect you to navigate those to make sure that everything is a-okay. But nonprofits, it's absolutely fine. But yeah. And in terms of keeping your status and your DEP exemption, especially DEP, you have to file that paperwork, and you just have to get it's sequential. You have to get your 501c3 first. Yeah.
The other specific question I would want asked in that situation is if you, not necessarily losing the tax status, because that seems totally wacko to me. But if you're getting taxed on those specific dollars that are from the for-profit entity, which is different. And actually, it's just part of a contract in New York City. I'm not going to go into too many of the details, but basically we did put a clause in the space sharing agreement that said, if for some reason the church was going to get taxed on this income they were getting from these folks, because they were not a nonprofit, that those folks would cover those taxes. So that would basically be in addition to their rent, they were going to have to cover those taxes that the church was going to incur. They signed it, so like that's what they came up with. But I think it's because the folks that were renting were fairly confident that that was probably not going to happen. Fingers crossed. But so that's something else to consider as well, like whether or not it's like the parking space that I talked about before. There's like renting to people, that's your mission and vision alignment people, and then maybe you rent some parking spaces and you make some good money off of it. And yeah, you have to pay a little taxes on it, but you've gotten so much money that, it's worth it. It's worth that trade-off. So I would want to know that information too, because renting to film shoots, that's a for-profit entity, right? And you're going to make hopefully a lot of money off of that. So is it worth it for you to pay a little bit of taxes to get that income? You bet it is. So,
Yeah, and that's often what we see is that people develop a scaled income, let's say a scaled income for tenants, so that nonprofit tenants are paying less or often nothing to use the space, and then for-profit clients or film studios, weddings, things like that, are paying a lot more and are therefore subsidizing the other uses of the space, which are more mission consistent.
And a wedding is still within your mission, but it's also can be really fancy. And think about like what they may be spending on the reception, right? But the actual marriage is happening in this space. So don't undercut your space in terms of that. I'm not saying like charge them through the roof, but.
Are there any final questions as we're coming up to 3:30? Okay, if there's nothing that's coming up, I wrote down something that Karen said, and I just want to repeat it, which is that there are no right or wrong answers. It's just what works for you and what you decide is right for your congregation. And that's really a core belief of Bricks and Mortals and this program, trying to find solutions that you're comfortable with for your very specific congregation and environments, and us providing you with resources to support those, to support your journey and what you decide to do with your space and how you want to use that, and serve your community. So this is just a way to give you a tool to be able to share your space with whomever and however that you want to do that. So thank you so much, Karen, for talking to us today and providing us these super specific resources. Potentially we'll be hearing from you more in the fall, so I will look out for that. Fingers crossed. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you guys. Thanks for organizing, Kate.